The year is 1952. At the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, a group of engineers from Alice Chalmers prepares to demonstrate their newest creation to the United States Army. The machine is small, almost comically so. A low-slung, tracked vehicle weighing less than 9 tons, dwarfed by the conventional tanks of the era. But strapped to its hull are 6 recoilless rifles, a terrifying array of 106mm barrels aimed at the horizon. It would become known as the M50 Ontos, a name that in Vietnam would inspire a special kind of dread. Its commander settles into the small turret, acquiring his target, an old brick wall 300 meters away. He depresses the firing stud. All 6 cannons fire as one. A monstrous roar tears the air apart. From the rear of the barrels, incandescent jets of exhaust gas erupt with such concussive force that the windows of nearby parked vehicles simply shatter. The brick wall is not merely breached, it is atomized, ceasing to exist in a cloud of dust and fury. In their shelters, the observers flinch instinctively from the shockwave. In that moment, it was clear that American designers had created something utterly unprecedented. The story of this strange weapon had begun a year earlier, born from the anxieties of a new global conflict. The Cold War was gathering momentum, and American generals understood that future wars would demand lightning-fast reactions in the most remote corners of the planet. Heavy tanks were fine for the plains of Europe, but they were useless if they couldn't be delivered to the fight. The Army needed a light, cheap, and mobile platform that could be flown anywhere. The initial experiments, based on a tracked transporter designated the T-55, were designed to carry soldiers, but the prototypes were rejected, deemed too cramped and poorly protected for infantrymen in full kit. Faced with a failed project, the engineers made a pivotal decision. The rejected chassis, a machine deemed unfit to carry men, would instead be turned into a carrier of immense firepower. It was an instrument born not of grand strategy, but of pragmatic, almost brutal logic, transforming a simple transport into a 6-headed dragon, capable of unleashing the fury of an entire artillery battery in a single, earth-shattering instant. In the quiet aftermath of global conflict, when the calculus of war was being rewritten, an idea took shape. It began not with the roar of an engine or the clang of steel, but with the silent finality of a wooden mock-up. This initial concept, a ghost of a machine, never even reached the prototype stage, its ambition confined to splinters and glue. From these humble origins, however, a far more audacious vision emerged: Project T-167. This was not a weapon of subtlety. It was a proposal for a bristling mechanical beast armed with a staggering 8 recoilless rifles, 4 mounted to each side. The barrels were to be arranged in 3 cascading rows, with a 4th slung below, a truly intimidating display of potential firepower. But the military planners, ever the pragmatists, deemed such an arsenal to be excessive. The sheer volume of ammunition required, and the nightmarish logistics of reloading 8 separate barrels in the heat of combat, consigned the T-167 to the archives of overreach. Swinging to the opposite end of the spectrum, designers then conceived of the T-166. It was a study in minimalism, mounting just a single recoilless rifle. This machine was distinct, featuring a peculiar semicircular hatch on the left side of its roof, designed solely to grant the crew access to the weapon mounted on the right. Later, this variant was fitted with a hydraulic mechanism, a clever piece of engineering that allowed the entire gun assembly to be lowered onto the vehicle's right flank. This not only facilitated a faster reload, but also gave the crew the option of dismounting the weapon for ground use. 3 of these vehicles were built, but this design too was judged a failure. Its single gun simply lacking the punch required for the modern battlefield. Out of this crucible of extremes, a compromise was forged. Project T-165 became the golden mean, a design that felt intuitively right. It carried 6 recoilless rifles, arranged in 2 banks of 3 on either side of the turret. This configuration, the engineers believed, struck the perfect balance between devastating firepower, manageable ammunition load, and the vehicle's overall dimensions. After a series of successful trials in 1953, the project was finally greenlit. An initial production run of 24 machines was authorized, and the vehicle received its official designation, M50. It was also given a beautiful, if enigmatic, name, the Ontos, a word from ancient Greek meaning, quite simply, the thing. The designer's relief, however, proved to adopt the M50 Ontos. The initial order for 1,000 vehicles was unceremoniously canceled. The reasons, when they came, were blunt and laid bare on the surface. Its armor was minimal, capable of protecting the crew from small arms fire and shell fragments, but little else, making it profoundly vulnerable. Its tall silhouette presented a tempting target, yet its internal space was so cramped it created immense discomfort for the crew and severely limited the ammunition they could carry. Army generals, men accustomed to the thunderous advance of heavily protected battle tanks, simply could not comprehend how to effectively deploy this strange, 6-barreled contraption. But just as its fate seemed sealed, the M50 Ontos found an unexpected champion. The United States Marine Corps, a service branch that had always cultivated a different approach to warfare, saw in this rejected machine the very thing it had been searching for. The Marines required a vehicle that was lightweight, highly mobile, and ferociously armed to support their amphibious landing operations. The Ontos, too fragile for the Army's grand battles, was perfectly suited for the beachhead. In 1955, the Marine Corps Command placed an order for 297 vehicles. The Allis-Chalmers Manufacturing Company, with renewed enthusiasm, began production. By the end of 1957, every last one of the ordered machines had been delivered. The production model M50 Ontos was an engineering marvel, a testament to purpose-built design where every component was honed for a specific, brutal task. It was a weapon rejected by its creators, only to be embraced by those who saw not its flaws, but its unique and violent promise. It stands as a stark reminder that in the world of warfare, purpose is not always dictated by design, but by the desperate necessities of those who must fight on the razor's edge. Every line, every angle, every bolt was subordinate to a single, ruthless design imperative: to shed the maximum possible weight while retaining devastating firepower. The result was a machine that seemed almost alien on the battlefield. Its hull took the form of a stark, quadrangular pyramid, its top truncated to serve as the mounting point for a small, almost insignificant-looking turret. The vehicle's entire length, from prow to stern, measured a mere 3 meters and 83 centimeters. Its width was just 2 meters and 59 centimeters, and it stood only 2 meters and 13 centimeters tall. A ground clearance of 37 centimeters gave it a respectable ability to traverse broken terrain, a hint of the mobility that was its true purpose. The hull itself was assembled by welding plates of rolled homogeneous armor, but the protection it offered was nominal at best. The armor plates were just 13 millimeters thick around the entire perimeter. The floor, shielding the crew from the earth below, was a wafer-thin 6 millimeters of steel. Its designers relied on a geometric gamble. The constructive angles of the sloped armor plates offered some additional, fleeting protection against heavy machine gun fire and the deadly spray of shrapnel. But against anything more serious, against a dedicated anti-tank round or a direct artillery hit, this armor was utterly, fatally incapable of saving its crew. This, however, was a conscious choice. The engineers had not placed their faith in survivability through defense, but in survivability through mobility and a powerful first strike. Interestingly, the base chassis of this vehicle became a test bed for experiments with truly revolutionary materials. A prototype hull was fabricated from a titanium alloy, one containing 6% aluminum and 4% vanadium. This particular alloy was the most common among titaniums, possessing superb mechanical properties, considered the strongest and most rigid readily available. The titanium armor provided roughly the same level of protection as steel of an equivalent thickness, but it reduced the hull's mass by a staggering 25%. The dream of a feather-light, invulnerable machine seemed within reach. But the extraordinary complexity of processing titanium and its frankly prohibitive cost placed a final, decisive cross on this promising experiment. The production models would remain clad in humble steel. The suspension system was a masterpiece of spatial efficiency, designed so that not a single one of its components would intrude upon the fighting compartment. 4 road wheels on each side were connected via bogies to torsion bars mounted externally on the hull. The drive wheels were located at the front, a characteristic hallmark of the American school of tank design. Each track was 528 millimeters wide, which, combined with a combat weight of only 8,630 kilograms, yielded a ground pressure of just 0.36 kilograms per square centimeter. For comparison, the contemporary Soviet T-55 medium tank exerted more than double that pressure on the ground. This incredibly low footprint allowed the American vehicle to move with confidence across soft soils, through marshlands, and even over the saturated earth of rice paddies, where heavier armor would become hopelessly mired. For its power plant, it relied on a 6-cylinder General Motors gasoline engine, producing 145 horsepower and capable of pushing the machine to a maximum road speed of 48 kilometers per hour. The engine was situated in the front right of the hull, and to its left, nestled beside the churning heart of his machine, sat the driver. It was a vehicle born not of compromise, but of a singular, radical vision. A belief that in modern warfare, the first shot and the ability to disappear were worth more than any thickness of steel. The machine's entire existence was predicated on a single, brutal purpose. It was a philosophy made manifest in steel, and its heart was not an engine, but its armament. The main trump card of the M50 Ontos was this fearsome array. 6 M41 recoilless rifles, mounted on a special traverse bar that passed through a small turret atop the hull. They were grouped in banks of 3 on each side, a configuration that gave the vehicle its unforgettable, almost insectoid silhouette. Each barrel had its own designation, a curious numbering system that began with number 1, the far left gun when viewed from the rear, and proceeded clockwise to number 6. The sheer weight of this artillery installation placed an immense strain on the mounting. The load was so great, in fact, that the crews found themselves in a constant battle with gravity, periodically having to realign the guns, which, over time, would inevitably begin to sag. And within this design lies a small, almost bureaucratic deception. The official caliber of the M41 rifle was listed as 106 millimeters, yet the true bore diameter was 105. This 1 millimeter fiction was a deliberate choice, a paper-thin adjustment made simply to avoid any confusion with a previous and notoriously unsuccessful recoilless rifle design. The weapon itself was a product of the early 1950s, developed to answer the call of a new kind of battlefield, and formally adopted by the United States Army in 1953. Its intended role was twofold: to obliterate enemy strongpoints and infantry positions, and to hunt the deadliest predator on the modern battlefield: armored vehicle. Its design was a masterclass in controlled violence. A rifle barrel for accuracy, and a piston breech block with 4 distinct exhaust nozzles. Upon firing, these vents would channel a torrent of propellant gases rearward, counteracting the immense force of the projectile and creating the recoilless effect. The gunner could elevate the barrels from -10 to a maximum of +20 degrees. Horizontally, the turret offered a traverse of 40 degrees to each side, a significant improvement. It's interesting to note that on the initial prototypes, this traverse was restricted to a paltry 15 degrees left and right. The military, quite rightly, deemed this wholly insufficient, and the flaw was corrected for the production models. The Ontos could deliver its fury in several ways. It could fire single, precise shots from any one of the 6 barrels. Or it could unleash volleys, culminating in the awe-inspiring spectacle of a simultaneous 6-gun salvo. To aid in aiming this arsenal, barrels number 2, 3, 4, and 5 were equipped with paired .50 caliber spotting machine guns. The ballistics of the tracer rounds fired from these machine guns were engineered to closely match the trajectory of the main 106mm shell, allowing the gunner to walk his shots onto the target for a near-certain first-round hit. In a pinch, all 6 main guns could be dismounted and fired from the ground, though guns number 2 and 5 were best suited for this role, as they were fitted with an additional elbow periscopic optical sight. Beneath this crown of firepower, the vehicle's engineering was just as unconventional. A 178-liter fuel tank gave it an operational range of only about 185 kilometers. The tank's construction was highly unusual. It was not a rigid container, but a flexible, rubberized bladder. Stranger still, a tubular channel ran directly through its center, a necessary compromise to allow the left drive shaft to pass through and deliver torque to the left drive sprocket. Later in its service life, the fleet underwent a crucial modernization. 294 of the 297 machines ever built were upgraded, receiving the new designation M50 Ontos. The principal difference was a new liquid-cooled 8-cylinder Chrysler gasoline engine, which boosted the power output to 180 horsepower. Alongside the more potent motor, these modernized vehicles received a reworked transmission and updated periscopes and sights. The Ontos was never a universal soldier. It was an outlier, an oddity born of a singular vision. It was too specialized, perhaps too strange, to fit neatly into military doctrine. Yet, in its uncompromising design, there is a stark lesson that sometimes the most direct and brutal solution is the one that leaves the deepest mark on history. The trajectory of the main projectile was not a matter of guesswork, but of precise, lethal calculation. To achieve this, the gunner was afforded a unique tool: 4 heavy machine guns, each one slaved to a main cannon, perfectly mimicking the arc of the larger shell. This allowed the operator to fire a burst, to watch the tracer rounds streak towards the target, and to precisely determine the point of impact before committing to the main event. These spotting rifles were controlled remotely from the steel sanctuary of the hull, fed from magazines loaded with specialized ammunition. Upon striking a hard surface, each bullet would blossom into a small, fleeting puff of white smoke, a ghost of the impact to come, serving as an unmistakable aiming point for fire correction. The entire system was sustained by a modest ammunition supply of just 480 rounds, distributed across all 4 barrels. For defense against infantry, a 7.62mm Browning machine gun was mounted centrally on the turret. It was a weapon of dual purpose. It could be operated in the traditional manner, fired by a foot pedal from within the relative safety of the vehicle, or it could be used as an independent, manually aimed weapon. For this, the gunner was required to stand to his full height, throw open the hatch above his seat, and release the machine gun from its mount. The standard combat load for this weapon was a respectable 1,000 rounds. Some crews, in time, would replace the old Browning with the more modern M60 machine gun. This modification, however, never became widespread. It was believed, and often proven in the heat of battle, that the time-tested Browning was more robust, requiring fewer barrel changes during the intense, sustained fire that defined an ambush or a last stand. The main armament itself was fed a diet of highly specialized shells. The first was a high-explosive round filled with a plasticized explosive. Its principle was terrifyingly simple. Upon impact, the charge did not detonate immediately, but instead spread or squashed across the widest possible area of the enemy's armor plate. Only then would it detonate. The resulting shock wave, transferred through the solid steel, would cause the interior face of the armor to shatter, blasting a deadly cone of metal fragments, or spall, into the crew compartment, annihilating the occupants and the vehicle's internal equipment. The warhead for this devastating round weighed 9 kilograms, and it left the barrel at a velocity of 498 meters per second. The second type was a cumulative, or heat, round, capable of burning through 400 millimeters of solid, homogeneous armor. This projectile employed an ingenious design to manage the colossal forces of its launch. Its shell casing was perforated with small holes, which allowed a portion of the propellant gases to vent backward through specialized nozzles. This created a reactive moment, a counterthrust that almost entirely negated the weapon's recoil. The entire assembly weighed 16.7 kilograms, measured nearly a meter in length, and achieved a muzzle velocity of around 500 meters per second. Its effective firing range was considered 1,200 meters, though the projectile could travel a maximum distance of nearly 3,000 meters. The M50 Ontos was conceived as a direct-fire weapon, a hunter designed for line-of-sight engagements. Yet its crews were also trained to deliver fire from concealed positions, engaging targets that the gunner could not even see. The vehicle's most significant vulnerability, however, was its ammunition capacity. The entire combat load for its 6 recoilless rifles was a mere 18 shots. The main portion, 8 rounds, was stowed in the stern below the rear access doors, protected by a heavy, closing plate. Another 4 shells were stored inside the cramped hull, to the right of the commander. Combined with the 6 rounds already loaded in the cannons, this constituted the entire standard issue. In practice, however, crews resorted to various improvisations to increase their staying power. There are documented cases where the commander's own seat was physically unbolted and removed, the precious space it occupied given over to stacking just a few more rounds. It was a stark illustration of the brutal calculus of combat, where comfort and even protocol become secondary to the desperate, primal need for one more chance to fire. Inside the claustrophobic confines of the M50 Ontos, a brutal calculus was always at play. Every square inch of liberated space was immediately claimed by the tools of war, with additional shells being crammed into any available nook or cranny. The logic was simple, if terrifying. More ammunition meant more time in the fight. What is perhaps more astonishing is that, in this desperate quest for firepower, even the driver's seat was sometimes deemed an expendable luxury. According to the harrowing recollections of one veteran, this extreme measure allowed them to pack a staggering 48 rounds into their steel coffin. The act of driving the machine, of aiming and firing its 6 cannons, was conducted while literally sitting on a throne of high explosives. It was a testament to the crew's grim determination and a chilling portrait of the compromises demanded by this unique weapon. The crew itself was a study in constrained efficiency. 3 men, each with a vital role in a space barely fit for one. The driver was wedged into the front left of the hull, the constant, deafening roar of the engine his only companion to the right. Above him, the commander, who also served as the gunner, sat on a solitary seat beneath the small cupola. From this perch, he alone was responsible for directing the vehicle and unleashing the fury of all 6 recoilless rifles. And then there was the third man, the loader. On the designer's blueprints, his position was a small cushion on the floor, to the left of the commander. But reality, as it so often does, intervened. The fighting compartment was so profoundly cramped that in actual service, the loader almost never rode inside the vehicle he was assigned to serve. He became a ghost in his own machine, forced to either ride precariously on the exterior armor, exposed to the elements. To perform his primary function, the loader had to engage in a dangerous, almost ritualistic dance. He would dismount, manually heave a shell into each of the 6 barrels, and then retreat to a safe distance before the commander unleashed the volley. Only after the violent blast and backwash had subsided could he return to do it all over again. To make matters worse, crews often drove with the vehicle's large rear doors wide open for ventilation, a practice that invited a constant storm of road dust and mud into the compartment. It was for this grimy, undignified state that the M50 Ontos earned its less than flattering nickname among the troops: the Pig. There was a fleeting attempt to rectify this fundamental design flaw. A field modification was proposed, one that would have enlarged the turret and, crucially, reduced the armament to just 2 recoilless rifles. This would have finally allowed the loader to perform his duties from within the relative safety of the armor. The idea, however, never progressed beyond a single wooden mock-up, a silent monument to what could have been. The M50 Ontos first smelled a conflict zone in 1958 during the Lebanon crisis, but the call to battle never came. Its true baptism by fire would have to wait another 7 years. In that time, doubts began to fester. Many in the military establishment began to wonder if this strange, 6-gunned beast would ever prove its worth in actual combat. But in April of 1965, everything changed. The machine's first shots were fired in anger, though not in the place anyone expected. Most military history enthusiasts, when asked, will confidently state that the Ontos first saw action in the jungles of Vietnam. This, however, is a common misconception. The truth is, the American self-propelled gun first unleashed its salvos in the Dominican Republic, a small Caribbean nation engulfed in the flames of a civil war. That year, an armed uprising threatened to topple the government. The United States, citing the protection of its citizens and the prevention of a pro-communist takeover, dispatched a limited military contingent. And carried ashore by the American fleet, ready to prove its deadly purpose, was the M50 Ontos. It was a machine conceived for a different war, against a different enemy. Yet its story was just beginning, written not in the grand strategies of generals, but in the grit, dust, and desperate ingenuity of the men who had to make it work. The landing craft ground against the sand, their ramps slamming down to disgorge the instruments of American power. United States Marines, their faces set and grim, poured into the chaos of the Dominican Civil War. With them came the familiar tools of their trade. Tracked amphibious transports churning through the surf, the heavy, reassuring bulk of the M48 Patton tank, and something else. Something strange. A low-slung, almost insectoid vehicle bristling with 6 recoilless rifles. The M50 Ontos. The thing. By this time, the rebel forces had become more than a mere insurgency. They had overrun government armories, capturing a significant arsenal of heavy weapons, including a small but potent armored contingent. And here, in the sweltering heat of the Caribbean, the story takes a truly peculiar turn. The origins of the rebel armor were not what anyone expected. The answer was as surprising as it was obscure. Sweden and France. In the great light tanks, the Stridsvagn L60. These were machines of a bygone era, yet they had remained in service for decades, a curious footnote of armored history. Now, in the spring of 1965, the rebels had seized 12 of them. They believed they held a trump card, and in a moment of profound overconfidence, they decided to play it against the newly arrived Americans. It was a decision that would prove utterly fatal. For the crews of the M50 Ontos, this was the moment they had been waiting for. The vehicle, often derided by conventional tankers, finally had a chance to demonstrate its brutal purpose. The first encounter was swift and decisive. A rebel-crewed Swedish tank rumbling through a Santo Domingo street was spotted. A single, well-aimed shot from one of the Ontos' 106mm recoilless rifles turned the vintage armor into a smoldering wreck. The 29th of April brought a more formal duel. An M50 Ontos and an M48 Patton from a Marine Expeditionary Unit found themselves in a direct engagement with 2 of the rebel Swedish tanks. There was no lengthy battle, no maneuvering for position. It was a stark execution. The Patton's 90mm cannon claimed one. The Ontos' volley of fire obliterated the other. One for each. But the Swedish relics were not the only exotic prey. A far more modern threat appeared in the sights of an Ontos crew. A French AMX-13 light tank. Armed with a high-velocity 75mm gun, it was considered a genuinely serious adversary. Yet against the specialized fury of the Ontos, its modern design meant nothing. A high-explosive anti-tank round slammed into its hull. The impact was so perfectly placed, so catastrophically effective, that it triggered a full detonation of the tank's ammunition. The resulting explosion tore the turret clean from its ring. With that, the combat career of the M50 Ontos in the Dominican Republic was largely over. But a far more arduous trial was already looming on the horizon. As the conflict in Vietnam began to escalate, the Marine Corps found itself with just 176 of these unique machines. Production had long since ceased, and the scarcity of spare parts had become a crippling issue. It was not uncommon for one Ontos to be sacrificed, stripped down to its bones just to keep several of its brethren fighting. The first of them arrived in Vietnam in 1965, but their deployment was immediately hampered by a truly unexpected obstacle: their own command. An almost surreal restriction was placed upon the vehicle's primary armament. The crews were forbidden from even loading their 6 main guns, let alone firing them, without explicit permission from battalion headquarters. Imagine the scene: a crew, under fire, peering through their periscopes at an enemy position, forced to get on the radio and formally request permission to simply make their weapon ready. They would then have to wait for a voice to crackle back over the airwaves with an answer. Eventually, the absurdity of the situation led to a slight revision. Crews were permitted to load the 106mm rifles at their own discretion. but they were still prohibited from opening fire without direct authorization. It was a baffling, maddening limitation that defied all combat logic. Only after some time had passed and the realities of the Vietnamese battlefield had set in were these rules finally and completely rescinded. The crews of the Ontos were at last free to fight. The machine, a weapon system born from a singular, almost strange design philosophy, had proven its lethality. Yet its greatest struggle was not always against a visible enemy, but against the invisible friction of war itself, the logistical nightmares, and the baffling chains of command. Its story is a testament that the true measure of any weapon is not merely its design, but the trust placed in the hands of those who must wield it in the terrifying clarity of battle. In the dense, suffocating jungles of Vietnam, a strange machine found a new and terrible purpose. It was a weapon designed for a different war, a different enemy. The M50 Ontos, Greek for the Thing, was conceived as a tank destroyer, a lightweight hunter intended to stalk and kill the steel behemoths of the Soviet bloc on the plains of Europe. Yet, its destiny would unfold not in open fields, but in a verdant hell where the very concept of a large-scale tank battle was a phantom. The conflict in Southeast Asia was not a war of graph. Force of any offensive was the infantry, moving through near impenetrable terrain, supported by mortars, artillery, and the screaming terror of air power. The enemy possessed a vanishingly small number of armored vehicles. Tank-on-tank engagements did occur, but they were violent, sporadic exceptions, not the rule. And so, the Ontos arrived in a war where its primary function was almost entirely obsolete. Yet it was precisely this unforgiving environment that allowed the M50 to reveal its hidden genius. In the hands of the Marine Corps, it became something else entirely. Its most significant contribution stemmed from an almost delicate characteristic: an extraordinarily low ground pressure. With its wide tracks, the Ontos could glide across landscapes that would swallow heavier armor whole. The soft, treacherous soil of the vast rice paddies, a death trap for conventional tanks, became just another path for this nimble machine. There is a well-documented instance where an M50 was used to ferry supplies to a main battle tank hopelessly mired in a swamp, for the simple reason that only the Ontos could navigate the boggy ground without sinking. Its compact size and low weight made it a ghost. It could creep silently toward the front lines, a steel predator used to obliterate fortified enemy positions before melting back into the jungle, clearing the way for the advancing infantry. This approach, however, was not without its perils. The vehicle was notoriously unstable on steep inclines, often sliding sideways. On occasion, it would flip completely, creating a terrifying ordeal for the crew trapped inside its thin armor. But its most infamous role was born from a unique challenge posed by the jungle itself. According to veterans, the Ontos excelled at a task that seemed simple on the surface: eliminating enemy soldiers concealed within the dense foliage. Conventional artillery shells and aerial bombs were surprisingly ineffective here. The thick canopy of vegetation would absorb the blast wave and catch the shrapnel, drastically reducing the munition's lethal radius. And calling for an airstrike was not always feasible. In these moments, the Americans deployed a truly monstrous munition. Shortly after the vehicle's adoption, its arsenal was expanded to include an anti-personnel round, a canister shot, officially designated fragmentation tracer. It was a thin-walled container filled with 6,000 lethal elements. Tiny steel darts, or flechettes, each weighing around 13 grams. A simultaneous volley from all 6 of the Ontos' recoilless rifles, a single, deafening roar, would create an expanding hemisphere of 36,000 of these deadly arrows. One might argue that the dense jungle would simply stop such small projectiles. But that was a fatal miscalculation. While a portion was undoubtedly blocked by trees and thick brush, the sheer, overwhelming volume of 36,000 darts saturated the target zone, scything through leaves and branches to find anything and anyone hiding within. The M50 Ontos was a machine of contradictions. A tank killer that rarely saw a tank. A fragile vehicle that could go where giants feared to tread. It is a chilling testament to the brutal adaptability of warfare, where a weapon, stripped of its original purpose, does not become useless. Instead, in the crucible of conflict, it is often reborn into something far more terrifying than its creators ever imagined. In the dense, suffocating jungles of Vietnam, it was known simply as the Thing. A strange, almost alien vehicle, the M50 Ontos became a source of genuine terror for the North Vietnamese army. Deployed to defend the perimeters of American fire bases, it played the role of a six-barreled deterrent. Veterans speak of the distinct psychological impact this small machine had. Its silhouette alone was enough to give pause to even the most determined attacker. It was, by any measure, a vulnerable machine. A single rocket-propelled grenade could tear through its thin armor. But that was its deadly paradox. When camouflaged and dug into a fortified position, the Ontos transformed into a lethal ambush predator. Most encounters for the NVA were tragically accidental. They would stumble upon its hiding place, realizing their fatal mistake only when all 6 recoilless rifles erupted in a single, deafening volley of fire and steel. There was often no time to even register what had happened. Its original design philosophy, a lightweight, air-transportable tank killer, was almost entirely forgotten in the mud of Southeast Asia. Yet in one remarkable instance during Operation DeSoto, that doctrine was briefly resurrected. Several M50 Ontos were slung beneath Sikorsky helicopters and ferried some 40 kilometers to the front lines. It was the only time in its entire combat career that the machine fulfilled the airborne promise of its creators, a fleeting glimpse of a different kind of war it was meant to fight. But the Ontos would find its true, brutal calling in the crucible of the 1968 Tet Offensive. During the savage, house-to-house fighting for the city of Hue, its unique characteristics became invaluable. While lumbering M48 Patton tanks struggled to maneuver through the narrow, rubble-choked streets, the nimble Ontos could dart through alleyways, bringing its immense firepower to bear with terrifying speed. Its cannons could systematically dismantle almost any building the enemy had fortified, turning brick and concrete into dust. This effectiveness, however, came at a terrible cost. They were not invulnerable, and losses of both machines and their crews were grievous. By 1969, the Ontos was a machine living on borrowed time. With no spare parts being manufactured, keeping them running became a logistical impossibility. Worn-out vehicles were cannibalized, their husks dug into the earth to serve as static pillboxes, a final, undignified service. In May of that year, the last operational units were loaded onto transport ships and sent home. Back in the United States, there was no victory parade. The Marine Corps, its creator and sole proponent, simply disposed of them. Most were unceremoniously cut apart for scrap. The Ontos, a machine the Army rejected but the Marines forged into a fearsome weapon, became a ghost of the jungle. A testament, perhaps, that in the chaos of war, the most effective tools are not always the ones designed by committee, but the ones adapted, embraced, and willed into greatness by the soldiers who needed them most.